Greetings, YouTube. Today I'll be reviewing The Fact of Evolution by Cameron M. Smith, and that's a lovely cover. It's very colorful. Some lovely insects on it. I quite like it. I think I picked this up at a thrift shop. I'm not positive, but it's a book that deals with, as you'll probably not be surprised, the fact of evolution. Now, I have been prolistizing evolution for a very long time. And whenever I do this, I tend to list specific books which I recommend people look at. For example, Darwin's The Origin of Species. This first edition, Barnes & Noble makes a good version of that. Originally, it was not called On the Origin of Species, it was just The Origin of Species. On was added to a later edition. Also, I recommend the first edition because at later dates, he actually begins to backpedal on some points that are actually evolution. He just found himself being barraged by people that were anti-evolution, and he kind of backpedaled a little on things, and he shouldn't have. So read the first edition. I also recommend The Beak of the Finch. The author escapes me, but it's called The Beak of the Finch. It shouldn't be hard to find. Excellent example of evolution that was tested under laboratory conditions. I would also recommend the works of Richard Dawkins. Now, Richard Dawkins is probably one of the greatest living minds on the topic of evolutionary theory. He's also a raging zealot and bigot, and generally a douche nozzle. So I don't like recommending his work any longer, flat out. His activities outside of evolutionary theory are so problematic, and he is such an offensive individual that I don't want people giving him any kudos any longer, nor giving him any money by purchasing his books. So I've been looking for a substitute, something else I can recommend that would cover the same types of topics, maybe even to have some more up-to-date material, and I've found it. The Fact of Evolution is the book. Now, this author also has a book. I think it's... Can I give him a little blur about that? No, I don't see it in here, but I think it's called The 10 Myths About Evolution or something like that. I'm going to look it up, because if it says any good, as good as this one, it also might be useful. And he titles the book The Fact of Evolution because that's what evolution is. It is a fact. And he's trying to move people past the difference between a scientific theory and the way the word theory is used in the colloquial sense. In everyday conversation, theory means something different than a scientific theory, which means the best thing we have at the moment. That's pretty much what a scientific theory means. This is our best model. It will be revised as more information comes forward, and of course, since it's a scientific theory, it can be scrapped when something better comes along to replace it. For example, at one time, people thought heat was transferred through the ether. There is no ether. It was a fluid. It flowed from one thing to another. Not quite how it works. So that word, theory, has both the scientific and a colloquial meaning, and that confusion makes a lot of people think, oh, it's just a theory, so it makes them think that they're some kind of expert. They're not. If you're anti-evolution, you're not an expert in anything, I imagine. Except maybe on ignorance. So he titles the book The Fact of Evolution, and that's very deliberate. So why do I like this book so much? Well, first of all, it told me things I didn't know, and that's awesome. For example, he discusses the horizontal gene transfer or lateral gene transfer. Now, I realized that there was some horizontal gene transfer, but I didn't realize there was so much of it. For example, 18% of the E. coli's genetic structure came from salmonella. That's a lot. That's a big hunk of transfer. So it's a little more prevalent than I thought it was, and to a greater extent, I should say. Also, that I'd always had a rather archaic view of mutation, that mutation was kind of like a sniper round. And because it's a sniper round and it was firing at something that's very, large and open structure, it doesn't happen very often. Because it's a single shot, and then since the structure it's aiming at is so incredibly open, it almost never hits anything, so mutations are incredibly rare. The reality is much different. In fact, mutations happen so often that there are genetic structures designed to do nothing but repair mutations. And they even have identified some of these repair genes, and they were able to turn them off. I think it was in a flatworm, but I'm not positive. And when they turned off the repair gene, this particular repair gene, mutation rates went up tenfold. That's a lot. So mutations are common, so common that life has evolved repair structures to keep them from damaging the genetic code more than they already do. So because they're so common, and because everything, anything is that often, is going to slip through eventually. It's like the shotgun blast. Yes, the repair features can repair almost all the damage done by those shotgun pellets, but it doesn't always get all of it. And therein is where the mutations come into play. And of course, exposure to different things can make it worse, like radiation and carcinogens and things like that can really screw with the gene structure and then make it go wonky in all different ways. Come on. Getting I know what you're in my lap right now. So those things I didn't know. That was cool. So the book introduced me to stuff I wasn't aware of. Okay, that right there gives it a thumbs up from me. Now, why do I think it's a good book to hand someone that is questioning evolution or is actually anti-evolution? Say, here, read this. Because this covers a lot of things that On the Origin of Species and The Beak of the Finch did cover. Now, those books cover them in much greater depth, of course, because there are entire books dedicated to those topics. But this covers enough of those topics, along with dealing with anti-evolutionary thinking, hence the title, The Fact of Evolution, that I think this is really one-stop shopping when it comes to dealing with someone who is questioning it or doesn't know because they're genuinely ignorant. And it's written in a layman-friendly manner, which is much like the original The Origin of Species, written very layman-friendly, because at the time there really weren't many scientific specialties in the middle of the 19th century. They were general discussions, and the lay people were considered to be the audience. It wasn't an expert talking to another expert. It was scientists talking to the general public. It was less of big eggheads talking to other big eggheads. Though there was a whole lot of white dudes involved in this process, so it wasn't like it was totally egalitarian. He presents this in a very clear and precise and simple manner. He says, if you believe in three things, you believe in evolution. The three things that the person has to believe in are replication, variation, selection. Now, he repeats numerous times that the word selection is often contentious, and I agree. I have said for years, I so wish Darwin had chose natural filtering rather than natural selection, because filtering can take place without a filterer. It just happens. While the word selection implies a selector. But we're stuck with it. It's been too long, 150 plus years. So we're stuck with the term selection. So, but if you believe in those three things, replication, that adults give birth to offspring. And I don't think you're going to find anybody that doesn't believe in replication. 2, variation, that offspring vary from their parents and from each other. And again, ask anyone who's got a sibling, and they will tell you how much they differ from their siblings. Okay? So, they have to believe in that one too. And lastly, selection. That the differences between siblings can have a positive or negative effect about their ability to themselves have offspring during their lives. And that could be one sibling is a little bit faster than another. One has a slightly weaker immune system. They're being driven in two different directions. The fast one is probably going to be able to survive a whole lot more readily, especially if its constitution, its immune system is normal, as opposed to its sibling, who is a normal speed, standard speed, and has a weaker immune system. That sibling is probably not going to have offspring or as many as the faster, healthy one. Now, you're probably not going to find anyone that doesn't believe in that either. And here's the thing. He says that evolution is the consequence of those three things. Evolution is not a thing in and of itself. It isn't a book. It isn't an object. It isn't some board of inquiry or panel that says, yes, that's evolution. No, that isn't. Evolution is the consequence of the three things: replication, variation, and selection. And he's able to explain this in a very clear manner. So, this is one-stop shopping for me. I can recommend this book. Boom. So many questions, and I say, go read The Fact of Evolution. That's it. Just go buy this book and read it. It isn't particularly large, and actually the last, it's only had this 250 pages of text and like 80 pages of notes in the back, which are notes, bibliography, things like that, an index, things like that. Now, the one thing about it I didn't like was the way he laid down the notes, because the notes are all in the back of the book, and I think that's an inferior place to put them. I think on the page where you're talking about it is superior, because I am less inclined, or not inclined at all. In fact, I think I looked up one note in the entire book to look in the back of the book. Now, having said that, he did list them in numerical order for the entire book. So it's not listed by chapter. So it's not like notes 1 through 12 for chapter 1 and notes 1 through 16 for chapter 2 and notes 1 through 9 for chapter 3. He didn't do that. There's just 1 through X, and it just goes all the way through the book. So finding the notes in the back is going to be easier than having to figure out which chapter you're in and then which note pertains to that chapter. So if you're going to put notes in the back, and I don't like that, but if you're going to do it that way. So it's easier to find the note. So right, again, there's recommended reading in the back, all kinds of information. So this is not only a useful book in and of itself, but it's a resource for future study, further study. So really, tremendously happy with this. Now, the only thing is, I don't know who to give it to. Because I want to give this book to somebody. I don't need it. I want to find someone that is on the fence, or someone that's truly and sincerely ignorant of the facts of evolution, and I want to hand this book to them. And I want them to tell me that they're going to read it. Because if they do, we're going to help somebody. We're going to pull away the veil so they understand evolution. And that's awesome. That's wonderful. That means that their children will not be saddled with the ignorance of the anti-evolutionary worldview. And that's great. So, highly recommended, awesome book, a one-stop shop for everything you need to help somebody understand evolution.